lonely cowboy took a 19-year-old girl who was left tied to a fence by her drunk uncle. The wind howled across the valley, driving needles of snow into Eli Hawkins' face as he urged his horse toward home. 3 days in Silver Creek, 3 days too many among people whose pity felt like sandpaper against his grief. His gelding snorted, pulling against the reins as they approached the fence line. Strange. The animal was usually eager for the barn. Easy, boy. Eli's voice scraped rough from disuse. That's when he saw her, a dark shape slumped against his fence post. At first, he thought someone had left a bundle of rags. Then it moved. Dismounting, his bad leg stiff with cold, Eli approached with one hand on his revolver. The lantern light revealed a young woman, her wrists bound to his fence post with rough rope. Her lips were blue, dark hair crusted with ice. A note fluttered from her threadbare coat. "She's your problem now. Good riddance." "Christ almighty," he muttered, knife already sawing through the ropes. She collapsed against him, lighter than she should be. He caught the scent of fear beneath the cold, like a wounded animal. Hoisting her across his saddle, Eli led his horse the remaining quarter-mile to his cabin. Inside, he laid her before the dying fire, rekindling it with practiced movements. Her skin was alabaster in the firelight, so cold it barely felt human when he checked her pulse. For 3 days, Eli moved between hearth and bedside, spooning broth between cracked lips, changing cool compresses for her fever, each motion a memory. Rachel's fevered whispers, Samuel's tiny hand going limp in his own. On the 4th morning, he found her watching him, eyes clear, gray-green, like spring sage. "You, the marshal?" Her voice rasped. "Not anymore." "My Uncle Vernon said you were—" She pushed herself upright, wincing. "He was mighty drunk when he left me." "That why he tied you to my fence post?" A bitter smile crossed her face. "Said I was useless, too expensive to feed." "I'll take you to town when you're stronger." Eli set a mug of coffee beside her. "Martha Jenkins at the general store might have work." "Please," the words seemed to cost her. "I can earn my keep. I cook, mend, garden, too." Eli frowned, studying this stranger who'd crashed into his carefully constructed solitude. 2 weeks, then we'll see." That night, unable to sleep, he listened to her quiet breathing from the other room. The house felt different. Warmer, somehow, dangerous. He'd built these walls to keep the world out after burying Rachel and Samuel. Now, the world had found him anyway, tied to his own damn fence post. February brought a grudging thaw, ice retreating from the eaves in crystalline surrenders. Eli watched from the barn doorway as Maggie approached Willow, his skittish mare no one could handle. "She'll bolt," he called, but his warning died as the horse lowered her head to Maggie's outstretched palm. "She's just scared," Maggie murmured, her fingers finding the sweet spot behind Willow's ear. "Aren't you, girl? Someone hurt you before?" Something tightened in Eli's chest. The girl had a way of speaking truth without knowing it. Later, as they sat for supper, venison stew that actually had flavor, unlike his usual fare, Maggie asked about the badge she'd glimpsed while cleaning. "U.S. Marshal," Eli said, surprised to hear himself answer. 8 years. "Why'd you stop?" The silence stretched taut between them. "Lost my taste for it," he finally said. Maggie nodded, not pressing. She'd learned when to let his silences be. The next morning he found her mending his shirts, humming softly. The sound struck him like a physical blow. How long since music had filled these walls? "Sheriff's coming," he said abruptly. "Might be best if you're scarce." Her hands stilled. "Ashamed to have found me on your fence post?" People talk. Let them, she said, but retreated to the barn anyway. Sheriff Blackwood's visit was brief, but his shrewd eyes missed nothing. Girls staying then? Till she's got somewhere else. Careful, Eli. Folks already wondering about a young woman living with a man like you. A man like me? Blackwood's gaze was steady. One who's lost too much to risk losing more. That evening, he found Maggie by the corral, snow melting around her boots in the last sunlight. Need to learn to shoot, he said, offering his spare revolver, and ride proper. Her eyebrows rose. Planning on keeping me around then? Just practical. But practical didn't explain why he stood closer than necessary as he showed her how to sight down the barrel, or why his breath caught when she leaned back against him for support. On the 14th day, the deadline neither mentioned, one of his best cattle took sick, collapsed in the south pasture. She'll die by morning, Eli muttered, seeing the symptoms. Not if I can help it. Maggie disappeared, returning with a pouch of herbs she'd been drying. Through the night, they worked together, her knowledge guiding his stronger hands. By dawn, the cow stood, weak but alive. Where'd you learn that? He asked, their shoulders nearly touching, as they watched the sunrise paint the snowcaps pink. My mother, before they both lived in that country. The deadline passed, unspoken. She stayed. March arrived with teasing warmth and treacherous mud. Eli watched Maggie coax seedlings in the south-facing window, her fingers gentle against fragile green stems. 2 months now, and he'd grown accustomed to sharing space, the quiet rhythm of her movements, the scent of soap in her hair when she passed too close. Thought we'd ride up to Thompson's meadow, he said over breakfast. See if you can handle willow on steeper ground. The mountain air tasted of pine and possibility as they crested the ridge. Maggie laughed, face flushed with exertion and sun, hair escaping its practical braid. It's beautiful, she breathed, dismounting beside him at the overlook. He nodded, not trusting his voice. What struck him wasn't the familiar vista of peaks and valleys, but seeing it reflected in her eyes, as though he'd forgotten how to look until now. First time I saw this, he found himself saying, I knew I'd build here. Rachel. The name emerged unpracticed. My wife agreed, sight unseen. Maggie's fingers brushed his arm, fleeting as a bird's wing. She must have trusted you very much. The ride back was silent, the air between them charged like before a storm. They smelled the whiskey before they saw him, Vernon Sullivan swaying by the porch steps, hat in hand. Maggie girl, he called, voice slurring with false cheer, come to bring you home. Eli felt her stiffen beside him. Get inside, he murmured. Found Jesus, Vernon was saying. Changed man now. Need my niece back where she belongs. She belongs where she chooses, Eli replied, positioning himself between them, hand resting near his holstered revolver. Vernon's bloodshot eyes narrowed, mighty protective for just an employer. Leave, Eli said, the single word carrying the weight of every badge he'd ever worn. Vernon's departure brought no relief. That night, Eli found Maggie packing her meager belongings by lamplight. What are you doing? He'll be back, she said, not meeting his eyes. With others, probably. I won't bring trouble to your door. It's our door now. The words surprised them both. Eli, stay. He reached for her hand, then stopped, fingers hovering inches from hers. Please. Something shifted between them, a current deeper than desire, stronger than fear. People will talk, she whispered, echoing his earlier warning. Let them. The next day they rode to Silver Creek for supplies. Martha Jenkins took one look at Maggie and swept her into the back room of her store, emerging later with knowing eyes. "Got a room upstairs if you need it, girl," Martha said pointedly. "She has a place," Eli answered, before Maggie could speak. In town, they felt the stares, heard the whispers. Poor Marshall, lonely after his loss. Girl, young enough to be his daughter. Riding home in the gathering dusk, snowflakes beginning to dance in the twilight, Eli realized with startling clarity he'd rather face the gossip, Vernon's threats, perhaps even danger, than return to the silence of before. April brought mud season, the mountains shedding winter in messy rivulets. Eli rode out at dawn to check the northern pasture fence, broken by spring runoff. The distance from the cabin settled uneasily in his chest. A new sensation, this reluctance to leave. 3 miles out, he heard it, a gunshot echoing across the valley. From his cabin, Eli drove his heels into his gelding, heart hammering against his ribs. More shots cracked the morning silence as he crested the rise. Below, 3 horses stood in his yard, men shouting, a crash of breaking glass. Then another shot, from inside. Maggie. He approached from the blind side, dismounting to slip through the aspen grove. Through the kitchen window, he saw Vernon and 2 miners, faces twisted with drink and malice. One clutched his arm, blood seeping between fingers. And there was Maggie, backed against the hearth, his Winchester steady in her hands, despite the bruise blooming on her cheek. "Next one's in your head, Uncle," she was saying, voice steel-edged. "I don't miss twice." Eli's entrance was swift, brutal, efficiency. In seconds, the miners were disarmed, Vernon pinned against the wall, Eli's forearm across his throat. "Give me one reason," Eli growled. "Eli, don't." Maggie's voice cut through his rage. "Not worth hanging for." Later, after they'd fled with Eli's promise of death, should they return, he found Maggie sweeping broken glass, hands trembling beneath her composure. "You're hurt." He reached for her bruised face, fingertips hovering without touching. "I'm fine," but her voice cracked. "I found your badge while cleaning." Eli froze. "And the trunk?" She nodded, eyes holding his. Who were they? The woman and boy in the photograph? The question hung between them, demanding truth he'd buried beneath 3 feet of mountain soil. Eli sank into a chair, suddenly bone-weary. "My wife Rachel, our son Samuel." Each name a smooth stone worn by grief. "Scarlet fever took them while I was hunting the Barton gang." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I chose the badge over them." The confession scraped his throat raw. "Got home 3 days too late." Maggie knelt before him, taking his calloused hands in hers. "You didn't choose. You were doing what you thought right." "Like you today." His voice roughened. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" A ghost of a smile. "Had a good teacher." That night, a spring blizzard howled down from the peaks, trapping them in fire-lit intimacy. They spoke in hushed tones, her mother's death in childbirth, her uncle's slow descent into bitterness, dreams abandoned and found again. Near midnight, tending the fire, Eli turned to find Maggie watching him, something unspoken in her gaze. The distance between them suddenly charged, magnetic. He leaned closer, her breath warm against his face. Hoofbeats in the yard shattered the moment. Sheriff Blackwood's voice called through the storm. "Eli, got news about Sullivan." Eli opened the door, cold air rushing between them like a reprieve or a punishment. Silver Creek bustled with morning activity, freight wagons unloading, miners heading to shifts, the constant percussion of construction as the town stretched its borders. Sheriff Blackwood's office smelled of coffee and gun oil, tidy as the man himself. "Vernon's in custody," Blackwood said, "but his mining friends will post bail by sunset." Eli's jaw tightened. "And then?" "And then, I can't guarantee Maggie's safety out at your place." Blackwood's gaze was direct. "Not without deputies I don't have." Martha Jenkins appeared at the jailhouse door, practical as ever in her crisp shirtwaist. "Girl can stay with me. Got the room above the store." Maggie opened her mouth to protest, but Eli spoke first. "It's settled then." Her eyes flashed, the first real anger he'd seen from her. "Don't I have a say?" "Not when it's your safety." His tone brooked no argument. The silence between them stretched taut as Martha led Maggie away, her shoulders stiff with unspoken words. Eli watched them disappear into the crowded street, a hollow ache spreading beneath his ribs. Just temporary, he told himself, until Vernon was dealt with. The saloon beckoned, a quick whiskey before heading back to an empty cabin, when a voice cut through the din. "Well, if it ain't the righteous Marshal Hawkins." Eli turned slowly. Jed Barton, brother to the outlaw Eli had tracked, while Rachel and Samuel lay dying. "Not a marshal anymore, Barton." Eli moved to pass him. Barton blocked his path. "My brother's still rotting in Yuma Territorial." "Your brother killed 3 men. Be grateful he's breathing at all." The first punch caught Eli in the jaw, expected, almost welcomed. The brawl erupted like wildfire, brutal and efficient. When it ended, Barton lay bleeding on the boardwalk, Eli's gun drawn with the same lethal precision that had once been his calling card. The crowd parted in silent witness, including Maggie, standing in Martha's doorway, face pale with recognition of this stranger wearing Eli's skin. That night, in Martha's tidy guest room, their words finally broke free. "That man today, that wasn't you." Maggie's voice trembled. "It was. It is." Eli stared at his bruised knuckles. "The part I tried to bury. By hiding away on that ranch, that's not living, Eli. That's just waiting to die." The truth of it stung worse than his split lip. "What would you have me do?" "Live." Her eyes glistened. "Stop punishing yourself for surviving." "You don't understand what I've done, the men I've—" "I understand loss." Her voice softened. "And I understand hiding. But I'm tired of it." She stood by the window, lamplight gilding her profile, no longer the half-frozen girl he'd cut from his fence post. Something shifted in his chest, recognition that in saving her, perhaps she was saving him. Martha's quiet knock interrupted. "Vernon made bail," she said through the door, "and he's nowhere to be found." Eli's hand moved instinctively to his empty holster, left behind at Blackwood's insistence. Across the room, Maggie's eyes met his, not in fear, but resolve. Smoke and screams tore through the evening quiet. The livery stable engulfed in crackling flames. Men formed bucket brigades while horses shrieked in terror, the perfect distraction. Eli helped free the last animal when Zeke Washington grabbed his arm, face grim in the firelight. Martha's place. Back door broken in. Cold dread flooded Eli's veins. By the time they reached the general store, the upstairs room stood empty, window open to the night. On the floor lay Martha, a bloody gash across her temple. "Vernon," she gasped as Eli helped her up, "took Maggie, said something about the old McClellan claim." Eli's hands moved of their own accord, strapping on the gun belt Blackwood returned to him, checking the revolver's chambers with practiced precision. "You're strapping on more than iron," Blackwood observed quietly, as Eli pinned the long-abandoned marshal's badge to his vest. "Some things you can't outrun," Eli replied. The abandoned mine stood skeletal against the moonlit sky, its timbers rotting like broken teeth. Eli approached alone, Blackwood and Zeke circling to the rear exit, hidden by darkness. "Vernon!" His voice echoed against stone walls. "It's Hawkins." Silence, then shuffling from the mine's maw. Vernon emerged, using Maggie as a shield, pistol pressed to her temple, her eyes locked with Eli's, steady, unafraid. "Should have minded your own business, lawman," Vernon snarled. "Girl belongs with family." "You tied her to my fence post," Eli reminded him, voice deceptively calm, while calculating distances, angles. "Better than letting her be your whore?" Maggie flinched, and in that microscopic movement, Eli saw his opening. His draw was lightning, a single shot that took Vernon in the shoulder, spinning him away from Maggie. The gunshot's echo triggered a deeper rumble. Ancient timbers groaned as the mine entrance began to collapse. "Run!" Eli shouted, lunging forward as Maggie broke free. She cleared the falling debris. He didn't. Pain exploded across Eli's back as a support beam struck him down, pinning him beneath its weight. Through dust and darkness, he saw Maggie's silhouette in the moonlight beyond the cave-in. Safe. That was enough. "Go," he mouthed, tasting blood. Instead, she turned back, dropping to her knees beside the unstable rubble. "Don't you dare give up, Elijah Hawkins," her voice fierce through the settling dust. "Not when I just found you." Her hands worked with surprising strength, moving smaller rocks, creating space. She wedged a broken timber as a lever, knowledge born from a childhood in mining camps. "Push when I say," she ordered, and he obeyed, muscles screaming as they worked in desperate tandem. The space widened. With a final surge of effort, Eli dragged himself free, seconds before the remaining structure collapsed with a thunderous finality. They lay in the dirt, gasping, alive. His hand found hers in the darkness. "You came back," he said, wonder breaking through pain. Maggie's fingers tightened around his. "Always will." The rising moon bathed them in silver light as Eli pulled her close, their first kiss tasting of dust and blood and promise, sweeter for how nearly it was lost. Behind them, Blackwood led a handcuffed, bleeding Vernon toward town. Ahead lay the long ride home. Home. No longer just a place, but a person. June painted the valley gold, wildflowers nodding in mountain breezes where snow had drifted months before. Eli stood in the doorway, watching Maggie in her garden, rows of medicinal herbs now thriving alongside vegetables, her hands gentle in the dark soil. The cabin had transformed, much like its occupants. Curtains softened windows that once stared blankly at the mountains. Bookshelves Eli had built now held volumes Martha found for Maggie. A second rocking chair sat beside the first on the porch. Small changes, seismic ones. Sheriff Blackwood's arrival scattered chickens in the yard. He dismounted with the ease of a man half his age. "Vernon took the plea," he announced without preamble. 5 years, territorial prison. Relief washed over Maggie's face as she joined them, wiping soil from her hands. Blackwood wasn't finished. "Town council's offering you deputy position, Eli. 3 days a week. Pays decent." Eli's hand found the small of Maggie's back, the touch now familiar, necessary. "I'll think on it." Later, as sunset gilded the peaks in amber light, he led Maggie up the trail behind the cabin at the overlook stood a small cairn of river stones, topped with carved wooden figures, a woman, a child. Rachel and Samuel, he said quietly, the names no longer burning his throat. Thought it was time you met them proper. Maggie's hand slipped into his, steady and warm. I've been carrying them like a weight, Eli continued, but they weren't that in life. They were light. He placed his marshal's badge beside the cairn, silver catching the dying sunlight. Not burying it this time, he explained. Just putting it where it belongs. Part of my past, not all of my future. Maggie's eyes shimmered in the golden hour light. And what is your future, Elijah Hawkins? Thought I might take that deputy job, he said, surprising himself with how right it felt. Can't hide skills that might help others. Martha offered me space in her store for my remedies. Her voice held cautious hope. We could have a foot in town, a foot here. Or, his heart hammered against his ribs, we could have a home here, together, proper. Her eyebrows rose. Proper. Married. The word emerged rough with emotion. If you'd have me. Her answer was in her kiss, in the tears that mingled between them, in the way her body fit against his, like the missing piece of himself he'd stopped searching for. When they returned to the cabin, twilight softening the edges of the world, Eli retrieved something from the trunk he once kept locked, a simple gold band that had been Rachel's mother's. She would have wanted you to have it, he said, voice thick with certainty. Someone who brought life back to this place. Their wedding at Summer's End transformed Silver Creek. The town that once whispered suspicions now strung lanterns across the street, music spilling from the church steps where they spoke their vows. Martha stood for Maggie, tears tracking unashamedly down her weathered cheeks. Zeke stood solemn and proud beside Eli, his gift a spirited colt from his prized bloodline. Sheriff Blackwood officiated with poorly concealed emotion, his voice catching when he spoke of second chances. Never seen you smile so much, Martha told Eli at the celebration after. Suits you. Got reason to, he replied, watching Maggie dance with Zeke's young apprentice, her laughter carrying across the square. Later, returning to their ranch beneath a canopy of stars, Eli carried her across the threshold as tradition demanded, not because she needed carrying, but because he needed to give this gift of tenderness to show how precious she had become. 5 years wove themselves into the fabric of their lives. Eli's badge came out 3 days weekly, but nightmares faded. His limp lessened with happiness. Maggie's herb business flourished. Her remedies sought across 3 counties. Their son's copper hair caught sunlight as he chased chickens, a sound Eli had never dared hope to hear again, echoing through rooms once silent with grief. The ranch expanded. New barn, 3 more horses, a milk cow, fences mended and extended. The cabin grew too. A new room added when their daughter arrived, with Maggie's eyes and Eli's stubborn chin. Blackwood brought news of Vernon's release with trepidation. But the man never returned, having found miner's work in Nevada territory. Some ghosts stay buried, Eli said simply. On their daughter's first birthday, they walked together to the fence post where it all began. Now it marked their property line, adorned with a hand-carved sign, Lonesome Trail Ranch. Strange name for a place with so much life, Maggie mused, their son riding his father's shoulders, their daughter cradled against her chest. Eli's free arm encircled her waist, drawing them close against the autumn chill. Reminds me where we started, he said, pressing his lips to her temple, and how far we've come. The setting sun burnished them in gold as they walked home, together. Not a perfect ending, but a perfect continuation. Behind them, the fence posts stood weathered but strong, the rope marks long since faded, transformed like everything else that terrible winter night had touched. Ahead lay the future they'd built, step by step, choice by choice, from the broken pieces of their past. A future neither had dared imagine on the night fate had tied them, reluctantly, irrevocably, together.